Hi, I'm Ross Waugh of Waugh Infrastructure Management and InfraManage, and today we're just continuing to look at a series of discussions that have come out of this paper that I produced for the Ingenium Conference in Dunedin in June 2013, Infrastructure Management focusing on changes to 2030. And today we're looking at the future implications for parks and property assets. If you've been following the video series, we looked initially at fiscal constraints and how well New Zealand's doing. We looked at population change and demography, and we looked at planning changes. And all of those add up to quite a few changes for parks and property. And so we're on page 53 of the paper. If you want to be looking at that, it's on warinfrastructure.com in the resources section. Both the paper and the conference slides are there. I'd encourage you to either have it up on your screen or print it out and have a look at it as we discuss this. Parks and property, changing urban forms are the first issue. Certainly in any of the European cities where people are in medium density or high density living, the importance of public green space becomes really high. Previously in New Zealand, if we go back 30 or 40 or 50 years, we had the classic quarter acre, 1,000 square metre section of New Zealand mythology, the barbecue and the pool in the backyard, and there's still plenty of those around. But increasingly we're getting in our major cities much smaller sections, infill housing, intensification units, medium density housing and apartment living. All of those reduce the green space in the public living, or the outdoor living space, particularly in individual properties, and that demand then in turn will drive demand for public green space. And so I just wonder whether our planning is keeping up with those trend changes and whether or not our parks provision or our green space provision is in the right sort of order for that. Also, we've got this demographic trend going on to more retired population. You're talking about people that don't have to go to work every day, so they're going to have more time on their hands. And I would have thought that as a trend, we'd be likely to see more people wanting to use passive recreation or active recreation to use parks and reserves and public facilities. And so I think not only we've got these changing urban forms which will knock on to, hey, we need more public green space, but we're going to have more demand for recreational assets as our population demography changes and we get more retired people, which is happening quite rapidly over the next 20-year to 30-year period. In terms of natural hazards resilience and refits as well, one of the things you find out real fast when you have a decent sized natural disaster like the Christchurch earthquake or big flooding is that public facilities and halls and things like that become really important in terms of your community resilience. Hagley Park used as triage centre for Central Christchurch, things like that, and halls used for temporary accommodation through those periods. And so I think, again, when you're assessing and looking at your assets over the next period is to keep in mind that public resilience requirement there. How do they fit in, make sure that you're still maintaining those functions in your assets, even if it doesn't meet your immediate primary purpose of that facility or that asset. It's just to have a look at that, just to make sure that that works that way and that it fits in with your wider civil defence emergency management planning. Parks in particular and community facilities are really going to feel, I think, the brunt of this constrained fiscal environment. As we looked at in one of the earlier videos and earlier in the report, we're in a period of fiscal constraint in New Zealand now for the foreseeable future, certainly the next 20, 30, 40 years. We've got some real fiscal challenges built into our public policy and our environment. And if I know anything about council service provision, the big network utilities, the transportation, the roads, water supplies, wastewater, always take the lion's share of the funding. They're absolutely core. And parks and public facilities, art galleries and pools and libraries and things like that struggle in that environment to get the funding that they perhaps deserve. And so one of the real questions around the parks and property asset areas in New Zealand is going to be how to fund. Local Government Act changes under the current government have focused local government on providing efficient and effective services. And yet it is these parks and property, the facilities that actually really improve the livability of local communities and are the things that people remember about local communities. So you've got this real tension, if you like, built into the system, and I think there's going to need to be quite a bit of thinking around the affordability of those services, the importance of them to the overall ambience and livability of our communities, and then just how we get on and fund and make sure that we sustain those and sustain the high lifestyle that we already have in New Zealand. Now, the other thing about green space assets and community assets in particular is that we're going to get a situation where we're going to have a lot more retired people, a lot more elderly people in the system. And so we're going to, I think, in those areas, and we're already seeing it perhaps in museums and in libraries, we're going to see more of volunteers manning those asset groups and providing for those asset groups. And certainly you see friends of libraries, friends of museums, friends of art galleries type groups now, and I think you might see them in parks as well. And there's certainly potential too for people to adopt parks and for there to be community labour, if you like. Now, that of course is going to have, if we end up with wider use of volunteers in that sector, people recently retired who just want to be involved in those sorts of things, there's a raft of contractual, employment, training, skill, safety and insurance issues, but I think we can work through them. What I just wanted to encourage as part of the paper for people to think about was, if that's coming, how are you going to manage it? How are you going to build it into your commercial thinking around how you're providing services? And I guess also, if you're using volunteers, what the mix is going to be with paid or contract staff, and then how does that affect your long-term budget requirements? So that's it for Parks and Property. Thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.